They refused to help with my tuition. I refused to help with retirement. The voicemail from my mother was exactly what I'd been dreading. Honey, it's Mom. We really need to talk about Dad's retirement account. The financial advisor says we're in trouble. Can you call me back? We might need to discuss some options. I stared at my phone, sitting in my Tesla Model S in the parking lot of my tech company's headquarters. 28 years old, senior software engineer, pulling in $180,000 a year, and my parents suddenly wanted to discuss options. Where were the options when I was 19 and begging them to co-sign a student loan? I deleted the voicemail and drove home to my downtown Seattle condo, the one I bought with cash last year after my stock options vested. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents, Richard and Susan Chen, had spent my entire childhood bragging about their financial success. Dad's dental practice was thriving, Mom's real estate business was booming. They drove matching BMW SUVs, took annual cruises to Europe, renovated their kitchen twice in 5 years. But when I got accepted to University of Washington's computer science program with partial scholarships that still left me $35,000 short. Suddenly they were broke. We believe you need to learn responsibility, Dad had said, not looking up from his Wall Street Journal. Taking out loans will make you appreciate your education more. But I already have partial scholarships, I'd argued. I'm working 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore. I just need help with the gap. Character is built through struggle, not handouts, Mom had chimed in from behind her MacBook Pro. You'll thank us later. So I struggled. God, did I struggle. I took out $87,000 in student loans, worked 3 jobs, campus bookstore, weekend catering gigs, and freelance web design until 2 a.m. most nights. I ate ramen so often I developed a vitamin deficiency my junior year. I wore the same 2 pairs of jeans for 4 years, washing them in my dorm's sink to save quarters for the laundromat. Meanwhile, my parents posted Facebook photos from Cabo, showed off their new hot tub, bought a second investment property in Whistler. I graduated summa cum laude in 2018, got hired immediately at a Fortune 500 tech company, and spent the next 3 years aggressively paying off loans while living in a studio apartment that was smaller than my parents' walk-in closet. Every extra penny went to Navient. No vacations, no new car, no social life that cost more than happy hour appetizers. But I did it. Paid off $87,000 in loans by age 26. Promoted twice. Headhunted by 3 different companies. Built up a 6-figure investment portfolio. My parents were so proud. Suddenly I was the poster child for their parenting philosophy. See? We told you that struggle would pay off. Dad would beam at dinner parties, conveniently omitting how they'd vacationed in Italy the same semester I'd fainted in organic chemistry because I'd been skipping meals to afford textbooks. Now my phone was buzzing again. Text from Mom, did you get my message? It's really important. Dad's 401k took a huge hit and we miscalculated our savings. We're going to need help with the mortgage when he retires next year. I set the phone down and poured myself a glass of wine, a nice $40 Pinot Noir, the kind of small luxury I'd finally allowed myself to enjoy. Through my floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Elliott Bay stretching toward the Olympic Mountains. They wanted to discuss options. Funny how quickly their tune changed when they were the ones who needed help. The next morning, I decided to do some research before calling my parents back. If they wanted to discuss options, I needed to understand exactly what kind of hole they'd dug themselves into. It took me about 20 minutes of digging through public records and some light social media stalking to piece together the picture. Their Bellevue house, the 4-bedroom colonial they bought in 2015, still carried a $680,000 mortgage. Dad's dental practice had been struggling since 2019 when that new corporate chain opened 3 blocks away. Mom's real estate business had taken a hit during the pandemic and never fully recovered. But here's what really got me, they'd refinanced the house twice in the past 5 years. Cash out refinances, both times. The first one in 2019 funded their kitchen renovation and that Whistler condo. The second one in 2021 paid for Mom's new BMW X5 and what looked like about $40,000 in credit card debt. They'd literally borrowed against their house to maintain their lifestyle while Dad's income dropped and retirement loomed. My phone rang at 8:47 a.m. Mom, right on schedule, she always called before 9 a.m. when she wanted something, knowing I'd be having coffee before work. Honey. Did you get my message? I got it. I kept my voice neutral. What exactly is the situation? Well, I could hear papers rustling. Your father's 401k is sitting at about $340,000, which sounds like a lot, but the financial planner says it's not nearly enough. And with the mortgage payments, we're looking at about $8,000 a month in expenses when he retires. I nearly choked on my coffee. $8,000 a month. The mortgage is $3,200, then there's the Whistler place at $1,800, insurance, utilities, car payments. Her voice got smaller. We thought the rental income from Whistler would help, but it's been vacant more than occupied. So they had 2 mortgage payments. Of course they did. Mom, why didn't you downsize years ago? Or sell the Whistler place? Downsize? She sounded genuinely offended. Honey, this is our family home. And Whistler is an investment. We can't sell now, we'd lose money. The same woman who told me that financial responsibility means living within your means when I'd asked for help with a $12,000 annual tuition gap. What exactly are you asking me to do? Well, we were hoping, you're doing so well now, and we're so proud of everything you've accomplished. The buttering up phase. I remembered this tactic from when she wanted me to spend Christmas with Aunt Linda instead of my college friends. We thought maybe you could help with the mortgage payments. Just temporarily, until we figure out a long-term plan. You want me to pay your mortgage? Just help with it. Maybe $2,000 a month. We know you can afford it, living in that fancy condo downtown. $2,000 a month. $24,000 a year. I did the math automatically, that was more than half of what my entire education debt had been. The education debt they'd refused to help with because I needed to learn responsibility. Have you considered selling the house and moving somewhere smaller? Honey, be realistic. We've lived here for 8 years. All our friends are here. Your father's practice is here. I thought Dad was retiring. A pause. Well, semi-retiring. He might keep the practice part-time. So Dad wasn't even fully retiring, and they still wanted me to subsidize their lifestyle. The lifestyle they'd maintained by borrowing against their future while I'd eaten dollar store pasta for 4 years. I need to think about this, Mom. Of course, sweetheart. But don't take too long, we need to give the bank an answer about the mortgage modification by the end of the month. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at my investment portfolio on my laptop screen. $340,000 in index funds, $180,000 in my 401k, $95,000 in cash savings. More than enough to help them. The question was, did I want to? That evening, I decided to drive over to my parents' house in Bellevue. If I was going to have this conversation, it needed to be face-to-face. The 40-minute drive through Seattle traffic gave me time to think. By the time I pulled into their circular driveway, the one they'd had professionally repaved 2 years ago, I'd made my decision. Dad answered the door in his usual post-work uniform, khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Jeremy. What a surprise. Your mom said you might call, but we didn't expect you to come by. Figured we should talk in person. Mom appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The kitchen they'd renovated twice, most recently with that cash-out refinance I discovered. Granite countertops, custom cabinets, a Sub-Zero refrigerator that cost more than my first car. I brought the financial documents, Mom said, gesturing to a manila folder on their dining room table. I want you to see exactly where we stand. I sat down and flipped through the papers. It was worse than I'd thought. The 401k statements showed Dad had been borrowing against his retirement account for years, loans that were still being paid back with interest. Their credit card debt was closer to $60,000, not $40,000. And that Whistler condo? They bought it for $485,000 in 2019 and it was now worth maybe $420,000. Jesus, Dad. You've been taking loans from your 401k. He shifted uncomfortably. Just temporary cash flow issues. The practice had some equipment purchases, and then COVID hit. $73,000 in 401k loans. I held up the statement. This shows you borrowed $73,000 from your retirement. Which we're paying back, Mom said defensively. With interest. You're paying interest to yourself with money you don't have. They exchanged that look, the same one they'd given each other when I brought up college costs. The look that said I was being dramatic, unreasonable. Honey, Mom said in her patronizing voice, we know this looks complicated, but every successful family goes through financial transitions. The important thing is that we support each other. Support each other. I almost laughed. Where was the family support when I was living on cup noodles and working 60 hours a week? That was different, Dad said. You were young. You needed to build character. But you don't need to build character. At 62 and 58 years old. Mom's face tightened. We're not asking for charity, Jeremy. We're asking for temporary help from our son who's in a position to provide it. This is what families do. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. You want to know what I would have needed back in 2014? $35,000. That's it. 35 grand to cover what my scholarships didn't. We've been over this. No, let me finish. I turned the phone screen toward them. You see this? This is my investment account. I could write you a check for $35,000 right now and not even notice it's gone. Hell, I made more than that in stock appreciation last month alone. Dad's eyes widened slightly at the number on my screen. But here's the thing, I continued, closing the app. I remember exactly what you told me when I asked for help. Character is built through struggle, not handouts. You need to learn responsibility. You'll thank us later. Jeremy, that's not fair. You know what's not fair? Having to choose between buying textbooks and eating lunch. Working until 2 a.m. and then getting up for 8 a.m. classes. Watching my classmates go on spring break while I picked up extra catering shifts. The room went quiet. Outside, I could hear their automatic sprinkler system kicking on, another expense they somehow couldn't cut. So here's what's going to happen, I said, standing up from their expensive dining room table. You're going to learn responsibility. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on indignant shock. Dad just stared at me like I'd slapped him. What exactly does that mean? Mom's voice had gone ice cold, the same tone she'd used when I was 16 and came home past curfew. It means you're going to figure this out the same way you made me figure out college. No handouts. No family bailouts. Just good old-fashioned character building through struggle. Dad found his voice first. Jeremy, that's completely different. You were a kid then. We're talking about our retirement, our future security. And I was talking about my education. My future. But apparently that was less important than teaching me a lesson. We were trying to prepare you for the real world. Mom stood up, her chair scraping against their hardwood floors, the ones they'd refinanced their house to replace. Everything we did was for your own good. Really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were more interested in keeping your money for European vacations and kitchen renovations. That hit home. Mom's face flushed red. How dare you? How dare I what? Point out that you spent more on your Cabo trip in 2016 than I was asking for in help. I did the math, Mom. Your Facebook photos are very detailed. 4-star resort, first-class flights, those wine tours. That one vacation cost more than my entire junior year tuition. Dad tried a different approach. Son, we made mistakes. Maybe we should have helped more back then. But we can't change the past. What matters now is that you reap what you sowed. I picked up their financial documents and flipped to the mortgage statement. $3,200 a month for this house, $1,800 for a condo you can't even rent consistently, car payments on 2 luxury vehicles, and you want me to subsidize it? We're not asking you to subsidize anything, Mom snapped. We're asking for temporary assistance during a difficult transition. Temporary. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know what else was supposed to be temporary? My ramen diet. My 60-hour work weeks. Living in that studio apartment that was smaller than your walk-in closet. But I did it for 3.5 years because I didn't have rich parents to bail me out. The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. Dad glanced toward the front door, confused. Are you expecting someone? Mom asked. Dad shook his head, but went to answer it anyway. I heard muffled voices, then footsteps returning. Dad walked back and followed by a woman in a navy business suit carrying a leather portfolio. I'm sorry to interrupt, the woman said, but Mr. Chen, we had an appointment to discuss the mortgage modification options. I'm Sarah Martinez from First National. The timing was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Actually, I said, standing up, your timing is ideal. Mom, Dad, meet Sarah. Sarah, meet their son who they're hoping will co-sign their financial problems. Sarah looked uncomfortable. I can come back another time. No need. I grabbed my jacket. I was just leaving. But before I go, I turned back to my parents. Sarah, my parents are probably going to tell you that their son is going to help with the mortgage payments. I want you to know that's not happening. They need to explore other options. Jeremy. Mom's voice cracked. You can't be serious. Dead serious. Sell the Whistler place. Downsize this house. Get cheaper cars. You know, all the things you would have told me to do if I'd come to you drowning in debt after college. Dad's face had gone pale. Son, please. Let's talk about this rationally. I tried rational 12 years ago. You gave me a lecture about character instead. I headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Dad. That financial advisor who told you $340,000 wasn't enough for retirement. They were wrong. It's plenty, if you learn to live within your means. The last thing I heard before closing the door was Mom saying to the mortgage officer, I'm sorry, there's been a misunderstanding. I made it halfway to my car before my phone started buzzing. Mom, of course. I declined the call and drove home, but by the time I reached my condo, I had 17 missed calls and 12 text messages. The texts escalated from pleading to angry to desperate. Please come back so we can talk like adults. You're being incredibly selfish. Your father is having chest pains from the stress. Fine. Don't help. But don't come crying to us when you need something. Wait, I didn't mean that. Please call me back. I poured myself a scotch, the good stuff, Macallan 18 that cost more than my parents used to give me for monthly expenses, and settled into my leather armchair. The view of Elliott Bay was spectacular tonight, city lights reflecting off the dark water. My laptop chimed with a new email. The sender made me groan, linda.chen.realtor@gmail.com. Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, and apparently the first person they'd called to guilt-trip me. Jeremy, your mother called me in tears. I know you're upset about college, but your parents are in real trouble. They made mistakes, yes, but they're family. You're their only child and their retirement depends on you now. Please reconsider. This isn't who you are. Aunt Linda. I deleted it and opened my investment app instead. The evening markets were looking good. My Tesla stock was up 3%, my Apple holdings had gained $1,200 today. I was financially secure in ways my 19-year-old self couldn't have imagined. But Aunt Linda's email bothered me more than I wanted to admit. This isn't who you are. Who was I, exactly? The grateful son who'd overcome adversity? Or the bitter adult holding a decade-old grudge? My phone rang again. This time it was my friend Marcus from work. Dude, you sound weird in your texts. Everything okay? Family drama. My parents want me to bail them out of retirement debt. Shit. How much are we talking? They want 24 grand a year. Maybe more. Marcus whistled low. That's rough. But I mean, you can afford it, right? Your stock options alone. It's not about the money. Then what's it about? I found myself telling Marcus the whole story. College, the loans, the struggle, their refusal to help. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Man, he said when I finished. That's fucked up. But, are you sure this is the hill you want to die on? What do you mean? I mean, my dad's an asshole too. Never supported my music, told me I'd never make it as a sound engineer, pushed me toward accounting. But when he had his heart attack last year, I still paid for the good insurance. Because he's my dad, you know. After Marcus hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. My phone had finally stopped buzzing. The silence felt worse than the constant notifications. At 11:47 p.m., my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera and saw Dad standing in my hallway, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He was alone. I almost didn't answer. But something about his posture, shoulders slumped, hands shaking slightly, made me open the door. Jeremy. His voice was hoarse. Can we talk? Just you and me. How did you get past building security? I told them I was your father and it was an emergency. He attempted a weak smile. Technically true, right? Against my better judgment, I let him in. He stood awkwardly in my living room, taking in the expensive furniture, the city view, the life I'd built without their help. Your mother wanted to come, he said. I told her I needed to do this alone. Do what? Apologize. Dad sat heavily on my couch, looking around my condo with what I could only describe as stunned recognition. Like he was finally seeing the concrete proof of what I'd accomplished without them. Apologize for what, specifically? I kept my voice flat, but my heart was racing. In 28 years, I'd never heard my father use that word in reference to his own actions. He rubbed his face with both hands. Your mother doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I went to get coffee and clear my head. He looked up at me. She also doesn't know about the second mortgage. The second what? We took out a second mortgage in March. $37,000. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. To pay for her mother's memory care facility. I felt the anger in my chest shift into something more complicated. Grandma Chen is in memory care. Alzheimer's. Early stage, but progressing fast. The good facilities don't take Medicare, and we couldn't let her go to one of those state places. He was staring at his hands. Your mom visits every day. She doesn't want anyone to know how bad it's gotten. Why didn't you tell me? Because your mother is proud. And because. He finally looked at me directly. Because we knew we'd already lost the right to ask you for help. The revelation hit me like cold water. Grandma Chen, who used to slip me $20 bills when my parents weren't looking. Who taught me to play chess and let me help in her garden. She'd been struggling with memory issues for months, and I'd been too wrapped up in my own success to notice. How long? Diagnosed 8 months ago. But she'd been forgetting things for over a year. Dad's voice cracked slightly. She asked about you last week. Wanted to know when you were starting college. I sat down across from him, my righteous anger suddenly feeling much more complicated. The financial advisor meeting today was about more than just retirement. We owe $4,300 a month for her care on top of everything else. The second mortgage payment is another $680. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. Grandma Chen in a bright, clean room with a view of a garden. She was smiling, but her eyes looked confused. It's a good place. She's safe there. Jesus, Dad. I'm not telling you this to manipulate you, he said quickly. I'm telling you because you deserve the whole truth. We're not just financially irresponsible. We're drowning, and we made it worse by trying to handle everything ourselves. I walked to my kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water, buying myself time to think. When I came back, Dad was looking at a framed photo on my side table, my college graduation day. I was alone in the picture, grinning in my cap and gown outside the computer science building. We should have been there, he said quietly. You were working. The old excuse came out automatically. I was working because I scheduled a root canal that day. On purpose. Because I was ashamed that we hadn't helped you, and I didn't want to face all the other parents at graduation. He set the photo down carefully. Your mother wanted to close the office and come anyway. I talked her out of it. Why are you telling me this now? Because when you left tonight, she said something that scared me. She said, we raised him better than this. But Jeremy. He looked at me with eyes that seemed decades older than they had that morning. We didn't raise you at all for the last 10 years. You raised yourself. Into someone better than we deserved. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Please tell me your father found you. He's been gone for 3 hours and won't answer his phone. You should text her back, I said. In a minute. Dad stood up slowly. I have something else to show you first. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his wallet, old, yellowed, the creases worn soft from handling. He handed it to me carefully, like it might fall apart. It was my high school graduation speech. I'd been valedictorian, and I'd written about perseverance and family support. There was a line highlighted in faded yellow marker. I want to thank my parents for always believing I could do anything I set my mind to. I've carried this for 11 years, Dad said. Every time I made a financial decision that I knew was stupid, I'd read this and remember that you used to believe we were worthy of that gratitude. Dad. I'm not done. His voice got stronger. That night when Sarah, the mortgage officer, left. Your mother broke down completely. Not because of the money. Because she realized that somewhere along the way, we taught our son that love comes with conditions and family support has to be earned. He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. We can't change what we did to you in college. But I can tell you this, watching you walk out tonight was the proudest and most ashamed I've ever felt in my life. After Dad left, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at that graduation speech, remembering the kid who wrote it. The kid who genuinely believed his parents were heroes, even while working 60 hours a week to pay for textbooks. At 2:17 a.m., I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to Grandma Chen's memory care facility. The night nurse, Maria, recognized me from when I used to visit regularly 2 years ago. Jeremy. Your grandmother will be so happy to see you in the morning. She's been asking about you. What exactly has she been asking? Maria's expression grew gentle. Yesterday she wanted to know if you'd gotten your acceptance letter yet. Last week she was worried about your student loans. She paused. She keeps a photo of you in your cap and gown next to her bed. Tells everyone her grandson is going to change the world. I asked to see her room. Grandma was asleep, looking smaller than I remembered under her floral comforter. The room was beautiful, hardwood floors, crown molding, fresh flowers on the windowsill. Expensive. On her nightstand sat the graduation photo, next to a newer picture of me at my company's holiday party last year. Your parents visit every day, Maria whispered. Your mother reads to her, does her physical therapy exercises. Your father plays chess with her, even though she forgets the rules halfway through every game. Walking back to my car, I felt something crack inside my chest. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Sarah Martinez from First National. Your parents gave me your number. Could we schedule a time to discuss mortgage options? They seem to believe you've reconsidered helping. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. What exactly did they tell you? That their son is successful and family-oriented, and once he understood the full situation, he'd want to help preserve their home and ensure their obligations are met. Mrs. Chen was quite confident. Classic mom. Never accept defeat, just reframe the narrative. The next morning, I did something that felt both mature and petty. I called a family meeting. Neutral territory, a coffee shop in downtown Bellevue, halfway between my condo and their house. I arrived first and chose a corner table where we couldn't be overheard. They walked in together at exactly 10 a.m., Mom clutching her leather purse like armor. Dad looked like he hadn't slept either. They sat across from me with the careful movements of people walking into a trap. I went to see Grandma last night, I said without preamble. Mom's face crumpled slightly. How did she look? Confused. But comfortable. Maria says you visit every day. Of course we do. Mom's voice was defensive. She's my mother. And the facility costs $4,300 a month. Dad nodded. It's worth it. You should see some of the other places we looked at. I opened my laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet I'd built at 3 a.m. Okay. Let's talk numbers. Real numbers, not the sanitized version you gave me yesterday. I turned the screen toward them. Monthly expenses, house payment $3,200, Whistler condo $1,800, grandma's care $4,300, second mortgage $680, car payments $850, insurance $600, utilities $400, credit card minimums $900. That's $12,730 per month in fixed expenses. Mom stared at the screen. How did you? I'm good with data. It's literally my job. I scrolled down. Dad's current income from the practice, approximately $8,200 monthly after taxes and business expenses. His 401k, if withdrawn at retirement, provides maybe $2,000 monthly after taxes and penalties. Total monthly income in retirement, $2,000. The math was brutal on screen. A $10,730 monthly shortfall. You want me to cover a $10,000 monthly gap, I continued. That's $129,000 per year. More than most people's entire salary. Dad's voice was barely audible. We didn't realize it was that much. Because you've been borrowing against your future for years instead of making hard choices. I closed the laptop. But here's what I don't understand. Why didn't you ask me about grandma specifically? Why frame this as retirement help? Mom finally spoke. Because we were embarrassed. Because asking your child to help pay for your mother's medical care feels like admitting you failed at basic financial planning. Which you did. Which we did. She wiped her eyes with a napkin. Jeremy, I know you hate us right now. I don't hate you. That's the problem. It would be easier if I did. The coffee shop was filling up with the lunch crowd. Around us, people were having normal conversations about work, weekend plans, mundane complaints. We were discussing financial ruin. There's something else, Dad said quietly. The practice. I got an offer yesterday. A corporate chain wants to buy me out. For how much? After taxes and paying off business debt. About $340,000. I did the mental math. Combined with his 401k, that was almost $700,000. Still not enough for their current lifestyle, but enough to matter. Take it, I said. But then what do I do? I'm 62. Nobody's going to hire a 62-year-old dentist. Then don't be a dentist. Be a grandfather who lives within his means and visits his mother every day without worrying about bankruptcy. Mom was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You're talking about completely changing our lives. Welcome to adulthood. I changed my entire life when I was 19 because you wouldn't help with $35,000. You can change yours at 62 because you won't make rational financial decisions. The silence stretched until Dad's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went pale. What? Mom asked. It's the facility. Grandma fell this morning. They want us to come in. The drive to the memory care facility was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I followed my parents' BMW in my Tesla, watching Dad's brake lights flash erratically as Mom presumably gave him directions between panicked phone calls to the facility. By the time we arrived, Grandma was back in her room, sitting up in bed with a bandage over her left eyebrow. She looked impossibly small against the hospital-grade pillows, but her eyes were alert, more alert than I'd seen them in months. There's my college boy, she said when she saw me, her face lighting up. Did you bring your textbooks? We should study together. Dr. Patricia Williams, the facility director, pulled us into the hallway. She's fine physically, just a small cut from catching the corner of her nightstand. But the fall happened because she was trying to pack her suitcase. She's convinced she needs to go home and cook dinner for Jeremy before his big exam. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. She hasn't cooked in 2 years. The confusion is getting worse, Dr. Williams continued gently. We're going to need to move her to our memory support wing next month. It's more specialized care, but it's also more expensive. About $6,800 monthly instead of $4,300. The number hit like a physical blow. I watched my parents' faces cycle through shock, despair, and resignation in real time. We'll figure it out, Dad said automatically, the same thing he'd been saying for months while their debt mounted. Actually, I said, surprising myself, can we have a few minutes to discuss this as a family? Dr. Williams nodded and left us alone in the hallway. Through Grandma's doorway, I could see her showing Maria the photo of me in my graduation cap, explaining for probably the 100th time how proud she was of her grandson, the computer genius. We can't afford the memory wing, Mom said flatly. Even with your father selling the practice, we can't afford an extra $2,500 per month. The state facility, Dad started. No. My voice was sharper than I intended. Absolutely not. They both stared at me. I'll cover Grandma's care, I said. All of it. The memory wing, any medical expenses, whatever she needs. Jeremy. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. But, I continued, that's all I'm covering. You want to keep the house, the Whistler condo, the luxury cars. Figure it out yourselves. Grandma didn't choose to get Alzheimer's. You chose to refinance your house for kitchen renovations. Dad leaned against the wall like his legs might give out. You'd really do that? Pay for her care but not help us. She helped me when I was a kid. Slipped me money for school supplies, listened to my problems, made me feel like I mattered. She invested in me when it counted. I looked directly at him. Where was your investment when I needed it? That's not fair. It's perfectly fair. I'm making the same choice you made 12 years ago. I'm helping the family member who helped me, and letting the ones who refused to help me figure out their own character building. Mom started crying quietly, not the manipulative tears she'd used during arguments when I was younger, but genuine, exhausted sobs. We're going to lose everything, aren't we? You're going to lose the things you can't afford. That's different. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How did the family thing go? Still planning on letting them drown? Standing in that hallway, watching my parents realize their lifestyle was ending while my grandmother forgot my name but remembered being proud of me, I typed back, it's complicated. More complicated than I'd ever imagined. The next few days passed in a blur of spreadsheets, phone calls, and sleepless nights. I'd committed to paying $6,800 monthly for grandma's memory care, $81,600 per year, without really thinking through what that meant for my own financial plans. The down payment I'd been saving for a house. Gone. The early retirement timeline I'd mapped out. Pushed back 5 years, minimum. But every time I started to feel resentful, I'd remember the way Grandma's face had lit up when she saw me, even if she thought I was still in college. On Thursday morning, my assistant knocked on my office door. Jeremy. There's a woman here to see you. Says she's your mother. She doesn't have an appointment, but she seems pretty upset. Through my glass office walls, I could see Mom in the reception area, clutching a manila folder and looking completely out of place among the startup atmosphere of ping-pong tables and energy drink fridges. She'd dressed up, the navy suit she usually saved for important real estate clients, but her eyes were red and her hands were shaking. Send her back, I said. She walked into my office like she was approaching a judge for sentencing. I hope it's okay that I came here. I didn't want to ambush you at home again. What's in the folder? Listings. She sat down across from my desk and opened the folder with careful precision. I spent all day yesterday looking at smaller houses. Condos. Townhomes. Places we could actually afford if your father takes the buyout offer. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't what I'd expected. And there's a nice 2-bedroom condo in Kirkland. $380,000. If we sell our house and the Whistler place, we'd have enough to buy it outright with about $200,000 left over. She slid a listing across my desk. It has a small garden. Your father could grow tomatoes. The condo was nice, updated kitchen, decent view of Lake Washington, a 10-minute drive from Grandma's facility. It was also about a quarter the size of their current house. What does Dad think? He cried when I showed it to him. Mom's voice was steady, but I could see the effort it took. Not because he was sad. Because he was relieved. He said it felt like coming home. I studied the listing more carefully. HOA fees, property taxes, estimated utilities, it was all reasonable. Manageable on Dad's reduced income plus Social Security in a few years. There's something else, Mom continued. She pulled out another document. I talked to a bankruptcy attorney yesterday. Mom. Just to understand our options. He said with the house sale and your father's practice buyout, we wouldn't need to file. We could pay off all our debt and start over clean. She paused. It would mean admitting publicly that we failed, but we'd be free. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, for the first time in days. The woman who'd raised me to believe appearance mattered more than substance was sitting in my office talking about public failure like it was acceptable. Like it was even preferable to drowning in debt. What changed your mind? Your grandmother. Mom's voice cracked slightly. Yesterday she kept asking me when you were coming to visit, why you looked so sad the other day. Even with Alzheimer's, she could tell something was wrong. She said, Susan, what did you do to that boy? My throat tightened. She said that. She may not remember what year it is, but she remembers who you are. Who you've always been. And she remembers that we let you struggle alone. Mom wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I can't fix what we did 12 years ago. But I can stop making it worse. She stood up to leave, then paused at my office door. The realtor wants to list our house next week. If you'd like to see it one more time before strangers start walking through. Sunday dinner. Like we used to. After she left, I stared at that condo listing for 20 minutes. 2 bedrooms, 1,200 square feet, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people. Everything my parents had spent the last decade avoiding. Everything that might actually save them. Sunday dinner at my parents' house felt like attending a wake for their old life. Mom had cooked my favorite meal from childhood, beef stir-fry with snow peas and that ginger sauce she used to make from scratch, but we ate it off paper plates because she'd already packed their good china. The house was a monument to downsizing decisions. Bare walls where expensive art used to hang, empty shelves where Mom's crystal collection had been displayed, blue painters tape marking furniture that would go to storage versus the Goodwill pile. It was jarring seeing their lives reduced to keep, sell, or donate categories. The realtor thinks we'll get asking price, Dad said, cutting his beef into precise, nervous pieces. Maybe more. The market's still strong in Bellevue. That's good. I meant it. Every dollar over asking was a dollar less they'd need to worry about. Jeremy, Mom said carefully, there's something we need to tell you about the Whistler condo. My stomach dropped. What about it? We can't sell it. Dad set down his fork. Not yet. There's been a situation. Of course there had been. What kind of situation? Mom pulled out her phone and showed me a photo that made me lose my appetite. The Whistler condo's kitchen was destroyed, cabinets ripped off the walls, flooring warped and stained, what looked like black mold creeping up from the baseboards. Pipe burst in February while we were in Seattle. Renters didn't notice for 3 days because they were on a ski trip. Dad's voice was flat. Insurance covered some of it, but not the full repair costs. And not the lost rental income while it's uninhabitable. How much to fix it? $67,000. Mom's words came out in a rush. We got 3 estimates. That's the cheapest. I stared at the photo, watching their financial recovery plan crumble in real time. So you can't sell it, can't rent it, and can't afford to repair it. We're trapped, Dad said simply. Still paying the mortgage on a place that's losing money every month. The irony was suffocating. Here they were, finally making responsible choices, and their past decisions were still sabotaging them. It was like watching someone try to climb out of a hole while the walls kept caving in. There might be another option, I said slowly. I could buy the Whistler place from you. At fair market value, assuming it was repaired. Both parents froze mid-chew. You'd pay to fix it too? Mom asked. I'd pay to fix it, then buy it for what it's worth repaired. You'd get cash out, I'd get a vacation property. I was thinking out loud, running numbers in my head. Call it $420,000 purchase price minus the $67,000 in repairs. I'd write you a check for $353,000 and handle everything else. Dad's eyes filled with tears. Jeremy, that's incredibly generous, but we can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference. But the money for your grandmother's care, and now this. Mom shook her head. It's too much. We've already taken advantage of you enough. Actually, you haven't taken advantage of me at all. That's kind of been the problem. The comment hung in the air until Dad started laughing, not happy laughter, but the exhausted kind that comes when you realize how absurd your life has become. We're sitting in our foreclosed dream house, eating off paper plates, asking our son to bail us out of a moldy condo investment. He wiped his eyes. Your grandmother was right. We really don't know what we're doing. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Williams. Jeremy, could you call when convenient? We need to discuss your grandmother's transition to memory care. The reminder hit like cold water. While we'd been figuring out condo repairs and house sales, Grandma was getting worse. The call with Dr. Williams the next morning shattered any illusion that we were getting ahead of our problems. Your grandmother's condition has deteriorated significantly since the fall, she explained, her voice gentle but clinical. She's become agitated in the evenings, trying to leave the facility to go home and cook for Jeremy. Last night she made it to the parking lot before staff found her. I was sitting in my car outside a Starbucks, having taken a call during my lunch break. Is she safe? Physically, yes. But Jeremy, we need to move her to the secure memory wing immediately. Today, if possible. She can't be in the regular assisted living anymore. The secure wing. The phrase made my stomach clench. What does that mean, exactly? Locked doors. 24-hour supervision. It's still a beautiful environment, but she won't be able to wander. And the care ratio is much higher, 1 nurse for every 4 residents instead of 1 for 8. Of course it was more expensive. Everything was always more expensive. The cost difference we discussed, $6,800 instead of $4,300, that starts today if we make the transfer. I did the math automatically. An extra $2,500 per month, starting immediately instead of next month as planned. My carefully calculated budget for Grandma's care had just increased by $30,000 annually, 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Do it, I said. Transfer her today. There's one more thing. Dr. Williams paused, and I could hear papers rustling. Your grandmother has been asking specifically about college costs. She's very worried about how you're going to pay for school. Yesterday she tried to give Maria her wedding ring to help Jeremy with his tuition. The wedding ring Grandpa had saved for 6 months to buy in 1962. The one she'd worn for 53 years until Grandpa died. She tried to give it away because she thought I was still struggling to pay for college. After hanging up, I sat in that Starbucks parking lot for 20 minutes, watching people come and go with their normal problems. A woman arguing with someone about a work deadline. A teenager complaining to his friend about his parents' curfew. Regular life, happening all around me while mine felt like it was spinning out of control. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. The practice buyer wants to close by December 15th, says the offer expires if we don't accept by Wednesday. Wednesday. 3 days away. The pressure was building from every direction, Grandma's immediate care needs, my parents' house sale timeline, the Whistler condo sitting there like a moldy financial anchor, and now a buyer who wanted a quick decision on Dad's practice. I called Mom. How much do you think you'll clear from the house sale? After paying off both mortgages and realtor fees? Maybe $180,000. Why? And Dad's practice buyout is $340,000 after taxes. That's what he calculated, yes. I pulled up my banking app and stared at my accounts. The vacation condo purchase I'd offered would cost me $420,000 total. Grandma's increased care costs would be $81,600 this year alone. My own savings rate, which had been aggressive enough to retire early, was about to become barely adequate for normal retirement. But there was something else nagging at me. Something about the timeline of their financial crisis that didn't quite add up. Mom, when exactly did you take out the second mortgage for Grandma's care? March. Why? And when did you know Dad's practice was struggling? A pause. The revenue started dropping in 2019, but we didn't admit how bad it was until early this year. So you knew you had income problems and took on another $680 monthly payment anyway. Your grandmother needed care, Jeremy. We couldn't just. You could have asked me then. In March. Before things got this desperate. We thought we could handle it ourselves. There it was. Even facing financial ruin, even with Grandma's medical needs, they'd chosen to borrow against their house rather than ask their financially successful son for help. The same pride that had made them watch me eat ramen for 4 years was still making decisions for them 9 months later. We need to meet tonight, I said. All of us. There are some things we need to get straight before Dad accepts that buyout offer. Jeremy, what's wrong? What's wrong is that you're still lying to me. The meeting I demanded took place in their half-packed dining room at 7 p.m. sharp. I arrived with a folder full of bank statements, loan documents, and a timeline I'd spent 3 hours constructing from public records and their own admissions. Before Dad signs anything, I said, spreading papers across their table, I want to understand how $4,300 a month for Grandma's care turned into a financial crisis that requires me to spend $500,000 to solve. Mom shifted uncomfortably. Jeremy, we explained about the second mortgage. You explained one second mortgage. For Grandma's care. I pulled out a document I'd found in King County records. This is a different second mortgage. From September 2021. For $85,000. The silence was deafening. What was that money for? I kept my voice level, but my hands were shaking. Because it wasn't for Grandma. She wasn't even diagnosed until 8 months later. Dad's face had gone gray. How did you get that? Public records. Mortgage transactions over $50,000 are filed with the county. I pulled out more papers. There's also a home equity line of credit from June 2022. Another $40,000. And a cash advance on Mom's business credit cards totaling $23,000 over the past 18 months. Mom was staring at the documents like they might catch fire. Jeremy, we can explain. Then explain. Because according to my math, you've borrowed $148,000 against this house in the past 2 years. Grandma's care accounts for maybe $37,000 of that. Where's the other $111,000? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Through their kitchen window, I could see their neighbor's house, a similar colonial with a well-maintained yard and reasonable cars in the driveway. Normal people living within their means. Your mother's business had some bad investments, Dad said finally. Properties that didn't sell. Commission disputes. We had to cover the shortfall. How much of a shortfall? Mom's voice was barely audible. $67,000. In addition to the $23,000 in credit card advances. She nodded. What else? I was past being diplomatic. Because we're still $21,000 short of that total. Dad cleared his throat. The cars. We rolled negative equity from our previous leases into the new ones. Both of us. It was easier then. Than buying reasonable cars you could afford. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of their deception settling over me. So when you came to me panicking about retirement and Grandma's care, you'd already burned through $148,000 in home equity on business losses and luxury vehicles. It wasn't all at once, Mom said desperately. It was small amounts over time, and we kept thinking things would turn around. While I was visiting Grandma twice a month, watching her condition worsen, and you never once mentioned that you were drowning in debt partly because of your business failures. My phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Williams. Your grandmother is settled in a memory wing. She's asking for you. Says she wants to give you her grocery money for college. The image of Grandma trying to press crumpled dollar bills into my hand, thinking I still needed help with tuition, while her own children had blown through enough money to pay for her care for 3 years straight. The Whistler condo repair, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. The pipe burst in February. You knew about it. You knew you couldn't afford to fix it. But you didn't mention it when you asked me for help because you thought I'd figure out a solution that wouldn't cost you anything. That's exactly what happened. You presented this as a simple retirement shortfall and a noble sacrifice for Grandma's medical needs. You hid the fact that you'd already gambled away enough money to solve most of these problems yourselves. Dad's hands were shaking. Jeremy, we were ashamed. You should be ashamed. But not because you made mistakes. Because you lied to me about them. I started gathering up the documents. I told you I'd pay for Grandma's care and buy the Whistler condo. Those offers are rescinded. Jeremy, please. No. Sell the practice. Sell this house. Use that money to pay your debts and figure out Grandma's care yourselves. I stood up from their expensive dining room table, the one they bought with borrowed money. I'm done being manipulated by partial truths. But your grandmother will be fine. Because I'm going to pay for her care directly, through the facility. Not through you. I headed for the door. Maybe struggling with the real consequences of your choices will finally teach you that responsibility you were so concerned about me learning. The last thing I heard before leaving was Mom saying, we've lost him completely. She was wrong. They'd never really had me to lose. They just finally stopped being able to pretend they did. 2 days after walking out on my parents, I got a call that changed everything. Mr. Chin. This is Detective Sarah Morrison with Bellevue PD. We need to speak with you about your parents, Richard and Susan Chin. My blood went cold. I was sitting in my office, staring at code on my monitor, but the words suddenly looked like gibberish. What happened? Are they hurt? They're physically fine, but there's been an incident. Your father was arrested this morning for insurance fraud related to his dental practice. The world tilted sideways. That's impossible. Dad would never. Mr. Chen, I think you should come down to the station. There are some things you need to know. The drive to Bellevue PD took 23 minutes, but it felt like hours. Insurance fraud. The words kept bouncing around my head, making no sense. My father was many things, financially irresponsible, prideful, stubborn, but he wasn't a criminal. Detective Morrison was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense handshake. She led me to a small conference room that smelled like stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. Your father's been under investigation for 6 months, she began, opening a thick file. The insurance companies flagged unusual billing patterns. Procedures billed but not performed, inflated treatment codes, phantom patients. Phantom patients? Billing insurance for work done on people who don't exist. She slid a document across the table. We're looking at approximately $340,000 in fraudulent claims over 3 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. $340,000, exactly the amount Dad claimed he'd get from selling his practice. Oh my God. The practice sale your father mentioned. The buyer found the discrepancies during due diligence. That's when they called the insurance companies, who called us. Detective Morrison's voice was gentle but matter-of-fact. There was no legitimate buyer, Mr. Chin. Your father was trying to sell a practice built on fraud. I stared at the documents without really seeing them. Billing codes, patient names I didn't recognize, dates going back to 2021. Does my mother know? She claims she didn't, but she was listed as office manager on several of the fraudulent claims. We arrested her too, but she's being released on her own recognizance. Your father, his bail hearing is tomorrow morning. The room was spinning. How much is bail likely to be? Given the amount involved. Probably $75,000 cash, or $750,000 bond. Money they absolutely didn't have. Money I wasn't sure I wanted to provide even if I could. Detective Morrison, can I ask you something? The timeline of this fraud, it started in 2021. She flipped through the file. First flagged incident was March 2021. But the pattern really escalated starting in September 2021. September 2021. The same month they took out that first mysterious second mortgage for $85,000. Dad hadn't been struggling with legitimate business problems, he'd been desperately trying to cover up insurance fraud with borrowed money. There's something else, the detective continued. Your father's been cooperative, but he keeps asking us to call you. Says you're the only one who can make this right financially before it goes to trial. Even sitting in a police station, facing federal charges, my father was still trying to manipulate me into solving his problems. I need to see him, I said. Visiting hours are 2 to 4 p.m. But Mr. Chen. Detective Morrison closed the file. Whatever financial help your father thinks you can provide, this is beyond that now. He's looking at 2 to 5 years in federal prison. Walking out of that police station, I felt like I was living someone else's life. My phone had 14 missed calls, 12 from Mom, 2 from Aunt Linda. I deleted them all without listening. Instead, I called Dr. Williams at Grandma's facility. I need to set up a trust fund for my grandmother's care, I said. Something that can't be touched by anyone else, no matter what happens to the family finances. Jeremy, is everything all right? Everything was very much not all right. My father was a criminal. My mother was potentially an accomplice. And I was still the only person standing between my grandmother and a state facility. Just set up the trust, I said. For the next 10 years of care, paid in advance. $816,000. Nearly everything I had. But at least Grandma would be safe from whatever came next. The bail hearing was a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone. I sat in the back of the courtroom watching my father in an orange jumpsuit, handcuffed, looking 20 years older than he had a week ago. Mom sat 3 rows ahead of me, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Judge Patricia Yamamoto read the charges in a voice that made each word sound like a gavel strike: wire fraud, healthcare fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named Angela Torres, painted a picture of systematic deception spanning 3 years. Your Honor, Mr. Chen created an elaborate scheme involving 47 fake patients and over 200 fraudulent procedures. He used sophisticated billing software to rotate fake social security numbers and addresses. This wasn't desperation, it was calculated criminal enterprise. Dad's public defender, a tired-looking man named Jim Walsh, did his best. Your Honor, my client is a first-time offender facing financial hardship. He's cooperated fully with investigators and poses no flight risk. His elderly mother requires daily care, and his son is here in support. All eyes turned to me. I hadn't planned on being the character witness, but somehow that's what Walsh was making me. Judge Yamamoto looked at me directly. Mr. Chen, are you prepared to take responsibility for ensuring your father appears for trial? The question hung in the air like a trap. Say yes, and I became legally responsible for a man who'd spent 3 years lying to everyone. Say no, and Dad stayed in jail until trial. Your Honor, I said, standing up, I need to understand something first. The prosecutor mentioned sophisticated billing software. What kind of software? Judge Yamamoto frowned. That's an unusual question for a bail hearing. I'm a software engineer, Your Honor. If my father was using complex systems to commit fraud, I need to know if he had help. Prosecutor Torres shuffled through her papers. The defendant used MedBill Pro Enterprise, custom configured with automated rotation algorithms. Far beyond typical user capabilities. My stomach dropped. MedBill Pro Enterprise. I'd heard that name before. Your Honor, I need 5 minutes to consult with my father before answering about bail responsibility. The judge granted a brief recess. In the small consultation room, Dad sat across from me looking defeated and desperate. Jeremy, thank God you're here. I know this looks bad, but I can explain everything. Did Marcus Rodriguez help you set up the billing software? Dad's face went white. How do you know Marcus? Marcus. My coworker Marcus, who'd been so understanding about my family financial crisis. Marcus, who'd asked detailed questions about my parents' situation. Marcus, who worked in our company's healthcare software division and had access to enterprise medical billing systems. Jesus Christ, Dad. How long has Marcus been involved? It wasn't supposed to go this far. Marcus said it would be small adjustments, just enough to cover the business shortfall until things turned around. Dad's hands were shaking. He said his company's software could make minor coding corrections that insurance wouldn't flag. Minor corrections that totaled $340,000 in fraud. It escalated. Each month we had to cover the previous month's fake billings. Marcus kept saying the software could handle larger volumes, that the rotation algorithms were foolproof. Dad looked up at me with desperate eyes. He's been taking 30% of everything. Marcus had been stealing from insurance companies using my father as a front, earning over $100,000 in the process. And I'd been confiding in him about my family's financial problems, giving him inside information about their desperation level. Does Marcus know I'm Dad's son? Of course. That's how we met. He mentioned having a coworker named Jeremy Chen, and when I told him that was my son's name. Dad's voice trailed off. Oh God, Jeremy. He played us both. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Hey man, heard your dad got arrested. Terrible situation. Want to grab drinks tonight and talk about it? The predator, circling back to see what other damage he could do. I stood up and knocked on the door for the guard. Dad, I'll post your bail on one condition. You tell the prosecutor everything about Marcus Rodriguez. Every meeting, every conversation, every penny he took. Jeremy, he'll destroy me in court if I testify against him. He's already destroyed you. The question is whether you're going to let him destroy other people's parents too. Back in the courtroom, I stood when Judge Yamamoto reconvened. Your Honor, I'll take responsibility for my father's court appearances. But I'm also providing information to the prosecutor about a co-conspirator who hasn't been charged yet. Prosecutor Torres looked up sharply. Mr. Chen, are you saying there are additional defendants? I'm saying my coworker has been using our company's healthcare software to facilitate this fraud, and he specifically targeted my father because he knew about our family's financial situation. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Yamamoto set bail at $50,000 cash, money I could cover, barely. As the bailiff led Dad away until I could post bail, he mouthed, "Thank you." But I wasn't doing this for him anymore. I was doing it because Marcus Rodriguez had turned my family crisis into his personal profit center, and that son of a bitch was going to pay. The day Marcus Rodriguez was arrested, I was sitting in the FBI field office watching through a conference room window as they led him away in handcuffs. Special Agent Jennifer Park closed her laptop and turned to me. "The wire recordings you helped us get were perfect." 23 minutes of him explaining exactly how he targeted elderly dentists through their children's personal information. She slid a document across the table. "He's looking at 15 to 20 years federal time." Marcus had confessed everything to me over drinks at our usual happy hour spot, thinking I was just a concerned son seeking advice about my father's legal troubles. He had no idea I was wearing an FBI wire, recording every word of his scheme to exploit financially desperate medical professionals. What about my father's sentence? With his cooperation against Rodriguez and the other practitioners Marcus was running? Probably 18 months, mostly house arrest. Full restitution, obviously, but no serious prison time. Dad ended up serving 11 months of house arrest in that little Kirkland condo Mom had found. Every morning at 9 a.m., he'd walk the 4 blocks to Grandma's memory care facility, spend the day reading to her and doing physical therapy exercises, then walk home before his 6 p.m. curfew. The irony wasn't lost on me that his punishment became the most meaningful work he'd done in years. Mom lost her real estate license but found work as a part-time bookkeeper. They sold everything, the Bellevue house, the moldy Whistler condo, both BMWs, and paid $340,000 in restitution to the insurance companies. They were left with exactly enough to buy that 2-bedroom condo outright and start over at ages 62 and 58. "We should have done this 20 years ago," Dad told me 6 months into his house arrest. We were sitting in Grandma's room watching her work on a puzzle, her hands still steady even as her memories faded. Not the criminal part, but the living simply part. They couldn't afford to help me with college, but they could afford European vacations and kitchen renovations and luxury cars, until the debt caught up with them and they turned to crime. The math had never made sense because the priorities were wrong from the beginning. The trust fund I'd established for Grandma's care ended up being the smartest financial decision I ever made. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 years later, surrounded by photos of her family, there was enough left over to establish a scholarship fund at the University of Washington. The Richard and Susan Chin Scholarship for students whose parents earned too much to qualify for need-based aid but too little to pay full tuition. Students like I used to be. At Grandma's funeral, Mom grabbed my hand as we stood beside her casket. "She never stopped believing in you," she whispered. "Even when she forgot everything else." The final irony came 3 weeks after the funeral. I got a letter from the scholarship fund's first recipient, a 19-year-old computer science student working 3 jobs to pay for college. "Thank you for understanding what it's like when your parents want to help but can't," she'd written. "This scholarship means I can quit my weekend catering job and focus on my studies." I called my parents that night. They were in their small condo, Dad making dinner while Mom balanced their simple budget on her laptop. "I have an idea," I said. "What if you two became the scholarship program administrators? Interview candidates, verify financial need, make sure the money goes to kids who really need it." The silence stretched for 10 seconds before Mom started crying. "You trust us with that responsibility?" Dad's voice was thick with emotion. "I trust you to recognize struggle when you see it," I said. "And to make sure deserving kids get help when it matters most." They refused to help with my tuition. I refused to help with their retirement. But maybe, together, we could help the next generation avoid making the same mistakes we all did. That felt like the kind of responsibility worth learning.